It's Monday, September 25th, 2023. My name is Ashton Ellett. I'm here with the fifth installment of the Richard B. Russell Foundation Oral History Project, produced by the Russell Library at UGA. I'm here today in the Bob Short Oral History Studio with Mr. Chris Carr. Mr. Carr is currently the 54th Attorney General of Georgia, a position he has held since November 2016. A double dog, Mr. Carr earned a BBA from the Terry School of Business and his JD from the University of Georgia School of Law. He began his career as an attorney for Georgia Pacific before joining the Atlanta office of Alston and Bird. He later served as Vice President and General Counsel of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and Chief of Staff to United States Senator Johnny Isakson. Governor Nathan Deal appointed him Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Economic Development in 2013. He was then appointed to serve as Attorney General of Georgia in November 2016, and he has since twice won election to that office, first in 2018 and again in 2022. With regard to the Richard B. Russell Foundation, Mr. Carr served as a trustee from 2008 to 2017, including a stint as chairman from 2016 to 2017, when he stepped away from the foundation. Mr. Attorney General, Chris, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to sit down and record this oral history about your work and insights into the Russell Foundation.
Wonderful to be back with you, Ashton.
Thank you so much. Let's start at the beginning. Remind everybody where you grew up and where you came from.
Sure. Well, I was actually born in Lansing, Michigan, and on a flight back from D.C. one day with Congressman Tom Price, found out we were born in the same hospital in Michigan, which is some good Georgia political history. Not a lot of Georgians born in Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, Michigan.
No, I don't. I'd wager that. That's true. Yeah.
Tom and I were born there. So I moved down here, went to Marist High School, as you mentioned, double dog, UGA undergrad in law. While I was an undergrad, got to know a guy by the name of Kevin Isakson through interfraternity council and some folks that I served with there, and he was their roommate and that type of thing. But got to know him while I was working at Georgia Pacific. Johnny Isakson ran for the Senate in 1996, and I called up and asked to volunteer and made yard signs and stuffed envelopes and answered phones and did all that, everything that a campaign entails. We weren't successful in that race. I had gotten into law school, so I went to law school in the fall of '96, but I stayed close to Johnny and another Georgia grad by the name of Heath Garrett, who had managed Johnny's campaign. Johnny ended up running the state school board. I was in law school, and then the end of '98, Republicans had a terrible election year. Newt Gingrich steps down. Johnny decides to run for Congress. And so my third year of law school, went back and kind of volunteered for that race. Wanted to go to D.C., but the advice was go practice law, which I did at Alston and Bird. Did that for about 16 or 17 months. Had gotten to know a guy named Rogers Wade, who also was a trustee of the Russell Foundation and former chief of staff to Senator Herman Talmadge. Rogers hired me to go to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, which was a lot of fun. Worked with he and Kelly McCutcheon for a couple years. And then Johnny decided to run for the Senate when Zell Miller chose not to run for a re-election. And they called me and asked me to manage that campaign, which I did for 2 years, and we were successful. Went to D.C. for 3 as deputy chief of staff. Moved back down here in '08. So I was chief from '07 to '13, and that is when Governor Deal appointed me Commissioner of Economic Development. Served in that capacity for 3 years, and then was appointed Attorney General in 2016, which is where I serve today.
Sounds like you've done that spiel before. That's pretty good. It's very efficient.
Yeah, what's interesting too is I was named Chief of Staff on November 1st, 2007. Economic Development November 1st, 2013, and then Attorney General November 1st, 2016. Everybody says I should go out and buy a lottery ticket.
Yeah,
first. That's
All Saints Day is a good day in the Carr household.
That's right.
That's right. So tell me, how did you first learn about the Russell Foundation? I went back and looked at the minutes, and our friend Rogers was chair of the nominating committee, for on the foundation. Is he the one who approached you about joining the foundation?
He is. When Rogers and I would work together at the Public Policy Foundation, many days around 4 o'clock, I'd go into his office, and he had all these books of Georgia history, and we would talk about Georgia history. We both share a love of Georgia political history and just history in general, and we would sit there and talk about it. I actually had heard about the Russell Foundation when I was in school.
Okay.
Russell, I'd heard about, the Russell Professorship or those types of things, but didn't have any way, the tie was really Rogers.
Okay.
And so after having worked with Rogers, and then the opportunity presented itself, I think you said it mentioned in '08. And he was kind enough to, I think he was serving on the nominations. I think he was nominations chair, so it was Rogers that got me in.
What did he tell you about the work of the foundation and what to expect as a trustee?
Yeah, support for the university as it related to, Senator Russell loved the University of Georgia. So the one area of focus would be support programs, support the university. But then also, I think from more of a historical perspective, is how do you continue to perpetuate the memory and the legacy and the history of Senator Russell?
Did you ever have any hesitation of joining, or were you excited to come aboard?
I was very excited. Gotcha. Senator Russell was a giant, not only in Georgia but in the U.S. and not just that, but when you look at who was on the board at the time too, and you had a lot of folks that had done a lot in Georgia. Those that served like Buddy Darden, in office, and then those like Rogers, who were kind of behind the scenes, but Norman Underwood, and so many folks that and those that were relatives of the Russells. It was just again, for somebody that's a history buff, what a great opportunity. And then of course you see the rise of the library,
right,
and the impact that this facility and this library has on political history just in general. I think was exciting to me.
When you first came, what you were just mentioning, the library, which was still sort of taking shape. The library meaning the facility that we're in right now
on North Campus.
That's right. That's right. So your first meetings would have been either the Commerce Club or the sub-basement of the main library, which was the original Russell Library facility.
That's exactly right.
So tell me about the major initiatives and programs that you remember that were ongoing when you first joined in 08, 09.
Yeah, finish this building.
Yeah.
The building that we're sitting in. It really was. And there was a lot of conversation about ensuring that we finished that and finished the commitment. But then also, what does the world look like after? Making sure that we can continue to, again, programmatically support the university and then, again, also Senator Russell. But the big thing at the time was we got to finish this commitment, because in 08 too, that was an interesting economic time.
Right.
So we had an economic crisis at that time. I recall the conversations, but me being new, just trying to kind of take it all in. But that was the big thing, is to make sure that we could continue to fund this library.
Right, because as you mentioned, the commitment was the original $3 million, which is why this is the Richard B. Russell Building, Special Collections Libraries. But also you mentioned programming, that there was a commitment by the foundation to fund a $1 million endowment to ensure program, which I think was fulfilled your last year as chair and as a foundation trustee. Talking about the Great Recession, how did that affect the work of the foundation in terms, because of how the endowment works and or how it's not endowment but it's portfolio rather, and how it spins out? How do you remember that affecting the foundation?
That's a great question. I don't recall there being great challenges because of the conservative investment strategy.
Right.
And again, and Charles Campbell had been very involved in that too. So my recollection is I came in and there was concern, the what ifs.
Right.
But my recollection is nothing ever ended up impacting it, although I could be wrong.
I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think
recall a major.
Neither Dink nor Norman made it sound like there was actual major impact, and they looked at rolling things back a bit, but
if we needed to,
right?
And my recollection was that the rules changed for private foundations.
That's right.
Somewhere in there too.
Yeah.
So how much you ended up having to spend and of the core principle there was also an issue. But again, those guys have been doing this for a long time. They had this really set up, and again, I really commend them for it, because they invested the right way, and we could live up to our commitment.
So when you came on the board, Dink Naismith had just taken over as chair. After Charles Campbell had been chair for 17 years. And Charles Campbell, of course, is the former chief of staff, Senator Russell, the last chief of staff. What do you remember about Dink and the way Dink sort of guided the foundation those, I guess, 5 or 6 years that he was chair?
Well, I think he was perfect guy to follow up Charles, who is a wealth of knowledge, not only of Senator Russell, but just Georgia history, and what a great lawyer and just a wonderful human being. And Dink and I got to know each other, I think, going back potentially, maybe it may have been law school, maybe been after law school, but just a great personality, just a great, I think, leader for the Russell Foundation, having been in the newspaper business, having understood, again, storytelling and how you need to get that, get the word out. I think Dink did a great job. Plus, again, his years on the board. Charles, should be commended for 17 years. 17 years is a long time. But these guys, again, these folks that had been on the board for so many years, like Dink and others, to me, it was just an easy transition. Somebody that I knew well and trusted, and I think Dink did a great job.
Well, and of course, he had to step away from the chair because he took over another chair of the Board of Regents. Board of
Regents, that's right. I've forgotten that.
Yeah, and he left the chair of the Board of Regents. That's a whole other story. But Norman Underwood, somebody you mentioned earlier, was able to step in and lead the foundation through the 40th anniversary. Tell me about Norman and your work with Norman and what he's meant to the foundation over the years.
I didn't know Norman all that well until I got on the board.
Okay.
Knew his son Ned went to Marist, so I knew Ned and had heard of Norman, who was kind of, again, one of those giants that had run kind of behind the scenes, been involved in Georgia politics forever. And what an unbelievably decent human being. I mean, rock solid, steady, everybody trusts him, just great judgment. So to be able to spend a little bit of time around Norman was great, and he and I had developed a good relationship. And again, that kind of steady leadership, Charles, Dink, Norman, all kind of came back. And the other thing too, again, I think that all three of them had a commitment to the real goals and the tenet of the foundation, support the university and make sure that the legacy and the memory of Senator Russell was in fact continued.
Right.
And I think they all did an excellent job. And I was the first one to take the chairmanship that didn't know Senator Russell.
Right.
And so, but they had in some form or fashion either knew him or had observed, his career and whatnot. So I was the first one not to. So to be able to have that, and Rogers. I mean, Rogers is always such an integral part of my life. But again, the experiences that he had with Senator Russell and Senator Talmadge and others, and then these folks on the board afterward, from the creation of the foundation forward.
Right.
And I think that was critically important. So as you're going to transition to us, me and Hugh got a family relationship, but we're that next generation that didn't.
Right.
I was born in '72.
Right.
And I think Hugh's a few years younger than me.
So that's a good point. Is that the first chairs of the foundation were obviously Herman Talmadge, and Phil Landrum, Jasper Dorsey. So that generation that grew, with Senator Russell, and then to Charles and Dink. Earl Leonard's another great example of somebody who worked so closely with Senator Russell. To Gen Xers like you and Hugh, I mean that in the best possible sense.
I didn't know how I should take that.
Well, that's a perfectly Gen X response to not. So, tell me about the conversations that were had that brought you to the chair.
Sure.
That there were those conversations. Why you? Why then? that sort of
Well,
thing?
I think you probably have to ask Rogers or others why they. But from my perspective, it was love of the university and then love of history. So again, I am just a history buff. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I am a history buff, and I like to read Georgia history not just because of the subject matter, him or herself, but who was around at that time. What else was going on? How did we end up with interstates that went one way, or prison reform that happened that way? Whatever it may. I like to see who was around at the time.
Sure.
And so Rogers knew that love that I have for history. And I think, again, part of the role of the foundation is to talk about, again, the history of Senator Russell and his legacy. So I think from that perspective, I was very excited to have the opportunity to even be in the mix to become the chair, and I was honored to do it.
Well, tell me, what advice or wisdom was imparted either by Rogers or Charles, Dink, Norman? What advice did they give you as you took the chair?
I remember they just had confidence. And again, I think it would be interesting to hear more from them, but this was the first leap of faith, I think. For
Yeah.
those that knew the creation of the foundation and the senator to not. Either history, or they had you got Hugh and Otis the third.
Sure.
Having family ties.
Right.
To not. But I think the important thing was live up to our commitments, and make sure we continue to talk about the senator's work in a fact-based, evidence-based way. And that was but they were, they were nothing but supportive of this. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that they all recognized at some point somebody that didn't know the senator or wasn't there for the creation was going to take over if they had done it the right way, which they had.
Right.
And so I think that fortunately I had worked with, again, Norman was kind of, I had known of him, but he, of course, knew Senator Isaacson.
Sure.
So all of these folks in some form or fashion knew Johnny, knew Rogers, knew others, and so I think my affiliation with Johnny certainly helped in that regard too. But the other thing is when you're in a role like that and you have others that have so much history and understand, you rely on them. So I wasn't going to go lone wolf and go off and do something on my own. It was, how do you continue to do the things?
Right.
And I think this foundation has done a lot of good for the University of Georgia, and I think it's also made sure that in an evidence, fact-based way, you maintain the understanding of Senator Russell and who he was.
So how did you try to balance that continuation of sort of legacy programs with trying to institute or initiate new projects and new programs that sort of reflected your values and your views as somebody from a new generation?
Sure. Well, the law school, we expanded a program with the law school at that particular time and continued at that particular time the mock trial, moot court program, whatever it may be. But from my perspective was, all right, what did the senator love? He loved the university. He was a lawyer. It made sense to continue to focus on the law school, and his father, having been the Supreme Court justice and that type of thing. So how do you continue to support the university in ways that the senator would have wanted it to be done? And then again, also in a way that you can also talk a little bit about who he was. So to me, something like that made a lot of sense. We've had programs, and I think they've changed since I left a little bit, but we had programs that we had been supporting for years that made sense. Teaching, the fellowships that we had, and that type of thing. So continue to do those. But when it came to the law school, it just seemed to make sense to me. I mean, he was a lawyer and his father was a lawyer. That made perfect sense. And then the oral history.
Oh, yes.
So again, that's which I'm so proud, and again, you've done an unbelievable job with it. Is again, the senator loved the state of Georgia. And the senator loved the university, and he loved, from those that I taught with, he loved history. I mean, he was a voracious reader.
He was.
He was incredibly intelligent and loved history. So to me, putting this oral history program, which, again, there is so much history in the minds of, just take the board members, let alone the 116 people you've spoken to on the two-party project. I don't want. I never would want us to lose it, and I didn't think the senator would want us to lose it.
Well, tell me about, as the chair of the foundation, you work very closely with about, obviously everybody on the board, but specifically President Moorhead, Toby Graham, our university librarian, and Cheryl Vogt, who's the director of the Russell Library, longtime director of the Russell Library. Tell me about working with those individuals and trying to balance sort of the priorities and how that all shakes out.
Well, and an excellent point. The board and the foundation can't do its work without the folks that are doing this every day. Cheryl, of course, I think you had just mentioned, she's now in her 50th decade. I mean, you talk about somebody who loves, her fifth decade, not 50th year. That would be offensive.
Incredibly
please, I did not mean
impressive.
50th year, fifth decade. She knows, again, as much of this. She started, I think you said 2 years after the foundation came online.
That's right.
That's right. So again, that knowledge, that understanding, that history you rely on, and of course everybody on the board loved her.
Yeah.
Toby was an incredible supporter of what we were trying to do, always there, and so was the president. And again, I think when you have a president that was a student, who was a faculty member, a provost, and now a president, understanding what
a Russell Teaching Award
Russell
winner.
Teaching Award winner, exactly. He understands the importance, so that support matters. And so again, on a day-to-day basis, the folks on campus, particularly here in the library, Toby and Cheryl, just unbelievably valued.
I guess I shouldn't have left out the other ex officio member, who would be the chancellor. So Hank Huckabee and Steve Wrigley.
Absolutely.
And now, of course, Secretary Purdue, who's an ex officio member. Well, tell me, you
and the archivists and the folks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks. Again, I just think it's got to all work together. And from my perspective, it always did, and I was grateful. Even the programs for our meetings.
Yeah.
Putting together different, clips of the senator or what was. It's just very, very well done.
Well, tell me about the decision that you made, or was perhaps made for you, about your having to step away from the board when you did.
No, I chose to do that.
Okay.
So when I got appointed Attorney General, look, if there was ever going to be an issue between the university or the freestanding foundation, our client is the university system.
That's right.
I didn't want there even to ever be an issue. It was a very difficult decision to step down from my perspective, because again, I love the work of the foundation and the mission. But I made that decision to step down. I just felt that it was right. In the event I don't suspect there's never been an issue between the foundation and the university. But again, at that particular time, I just don't want anybody to question it. Which side I'd be on, or have to recuse, or anything like that. So I just thought that it was the right decision to step down and off not just this board, but every.
I was about to say this wasn't the only thing you had to step away from.
No, and I just felt like, again, if I've got this job, I got to focus on the job, do it to the best of my ability.
If I recall correctly, at the 2017 meeting, you said that you had put off stepping away from the Russell Foundation as long as you could, so you could see through that last meeting.
That's right.
Well, tell me, what were did you have conversations with Hugh III? We have to be specific when we're talking about the Russell Foundation. Hugh III, about succeeding you as chair.
I recall. I don't recall many of the specifics, but I know that again he had gotten on, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit after I did. I don't remember when he.
That sounds right. That feels right.
Yeah. But being a family member, again, being an incredible lawyer, just a good friend. I mean, I knew that Hugh would be great in this role. And so did everybody else.
I think you've been proven correct in that.
He's a step up, and no doubt. So I recall just having some conversations, and I knew he was interested. I mean, again, same type thing. My recollection, again, loves the mission, loves history, and then I think that family tie was a nice. I think that matters too.
Oh, absolutely.
A family member, and as the chair.
Yeah, and Hugh Peterson Jr., his father, was an executor of the senator's estate.
That's right.
So that obviously brings the tie closer.
And every now and again, I punch the wrong button, so I get to talk to Mr. Hugh, and I get to talk to
it's a win-win situation
is.
either way, but both are great for different reasons.
That's right.
So tell me, what was your proudest achievement of your time on the board, the foundation, but overall the overall work of the foundation?
Yeah, I think one was completing our obligations to make sure that we lived up to them. But the oral history program, I mean, I love it, and I'm just so proud of that it's continued. I'm proud that it's expanded. Just to get the brief update from you on kind of where things are. I just, as a history buff, I think that going back to what I said originally, I like to read biographies because not just the individual, but who else was around. And no matter who, history is written by those who write it and the perspective of those who had it. Well, I think it's fascinating to be able to get in a room with people and ask them, you were sitting one chair away, what was your perspective? And you've got all these different perspectives, whether it was the two-party system of the 2002 era, whether it's Senator Russell, whether it's Senator Isaacson, whoever it is. But to get those perspectives, that all matters, and that is all part of the story of history. And so to have this program through the Russell Foundation, I was excited about it, and I'm just proud that it continues to this day.
And just for the record, I did not bribe a government official to say that about the program.
But you take me around with you because I say the exact same thing.
Well, tell me, with Senator Russell, there's not necessarily always, but every once in a while there arises some controversy around the Russell name. Do you ever worry or think that we'll get to a point where the Richard Russell name is perhaps a detriment or an albatross that can hold back either the work of the foundation or the library?
Well, I sure hope not. Look, I'm a history by addition, not subtraction or deletion person. And it's like I said before, history it's got the good, the bad, and the ugly. I believe that we need to tell more of the story, not less. And if you take somebody out or you take them away, that doesn't change the lessons that should be learned. And so I hope from Senator Russell. I know that the controversy comes on the issue of race, and I think if you're going to look at it in 2023, there's nobody going to say that I'm aware of that they agree with the senator's position on race. But I hope that also, if we're going to be true historians, and if we're going to truly tell the story, we're going to talk about rural electrification, which changed rural America, not just Georgia, rural America. The building of the modern Navy, the food stamp program, the fact that he was a giant in that particular era. I think it's important to learn those lessons. I also believe that it's important, again, tell the whole story. But don't sweep it away. Don't delete it. Don't subtract from it. Tell the whole story in a fact-based, evidence-based way. And that's where I think the foundation can be and is an important point as it relates to Senator Russell. So I hope we don't ever get to a point that we take anything away or it becomes so controversial that you can't talk about it, because it shouldn't be. It should be a point of conversation for individuals to have from a historical perspective.
Is there anything that you would have liked to have achieved had you stayed a little longer on the foundation or as chairman in terms of projects, programs, anything like that?
Well, no, I think what I would have wanted to do is talk with you more about oral history and where else we can go, and recognizing that resources are, you gotta, how do we continue? But maybe there's a day that I'll be back.
That's,
maybe there's a day that but hopefully, maybe not anytime soon, but
right.
There's a day we come back.
Well, as we wrap up, what are your final thoughts on the Russell Foundation's its mission and its legacy?
Yeah, I think, again, hopefully there is a track record that people recognize and will continue to be solidified that supports the university. And I hope that there are conversations that continue to go forward, 2023 and beyond, that talk about history, that talk about legacy in a fact-based way that is additive, that is, we don't take away from anything that has occurred in our past, but let's learn from it. And I think that this has been an important foundation. I think it's been an important organization that has supported professors and students and the university and raised the level of historical research in this state. And again, if you look at it again from just a political history perspective, the Lyndon Johnson books, and how many folks use this library, the Richard Russell Library, in order to analyze our country and the impact of politics on it. I think it's wonderful.
Well, and we're getting to the point now where students very soon will be going back and looking through your work and the work of Joan in the offices, Zell Miller's office, Max Cleland's office, Johnny Isaacson's office, that those records are now here and being processed. The big change is that these are born digital records, so it's not boxes and boxes of onion skin paper anymore. But we're reaching that point where the past is catching up with the present here at the archives. Well, stepping back, I say, what have you been up to since you left the board?
Well, so it's been a unique time for all of us. Having gotten appointed in 2016, I had to serve out the remainder of Sam Olin's term. So I was learning the job and running at the same time between 2016 and 2018. Fortunately, got elected in 18, and then 2020 hit. And I tell Governor Kemp all the time. I say I don't remember standing on the stump in 2018 with you saying you'll be the best governor in a global health pandemic with an economic crisis, social justice unrest, and a historically contested election. But that's where we found ourselves. And I think that if you look at where we have all been from November of 2020 until here we sit in September of 2023, I think the Georgia story is an incredible one. And I think it is a model for the nation, whether you look at economic development, a belief in the rule of law and public safety, and leadership that matters based on the rule of law. I think we should be really proud of the state.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave off. Any final thoughts you'd like to record for posterity?
Just great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we really do appreciate it. On behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library, Attorney General Chris Carr, thank you so much, and go Dogs.
Go Dogs.